My conversation today is with author and essayist Peter Mark Adams. As a researcher and writer, Peter specializes in the ethnography and visuality of ritual, sacred landscape, esotericism, consciousness, and healing. He's someone whose works, such as Hagia Sophia, Sanctum of Kronos, Spiritual Descent in an Age of Tyranny, Mystai, Dancing Out the Mysteries of Dionysus, as well as a collaboration with Christophe Poncet on 2 esoteric tarots, have contributed extremely valuable insights and paradigm-altering perspectives throughout contemporary esoteric studies. Peter's erudition and penetration of his subject matter is unparalleled. It was my great pleasure to sit down with him and discuss energy healing, visionary experiences, his work with sacred symbols and images, the Hagia Sophia, and much more. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. Well, I have with me here today Peter Mark Adams. It's a real pleasure to finally get you on the podcast. You've been requested many times, actually, by listeners, or maybe suggested, sometimes more or less gently, that I should invite you on here. But I'm very pleased to have you with us here today. So thanks for being here.
Oh, I'm delighted to appear and to chat with you, Ike.
Great. So, this being your first time on the podcast with me, I like to ask everybody a little bit about what brought them to the threshold of either their practice, their researches, their disciplines, what have you, because everybody likes a good backstory. So I present that to you. What brought you to the threshold of your researches?
Well, I go back to like when I was 7, 8 years old, and my encounter with Egypt and Egyptology. And that really struck a chord with me, which has remained over these past, getting on for, 60 odd years now. But I can say that it was really when I started doing professional energy healing work, that was like 25 years ago now, that I really started to engage at another level, with another intensity, with parallel worlds, with the truly esoteric dimensions of existence. So for me, it came through the healing path. And for me, that was a natural one because I had a lot of experience with martial arts prior to that in my late teens. So like the energy disciplines I had learned over there made a kind of natural feeder into healing, which is like the flip side of the coin, isn't it? So, like if the acupuncture points are strike points, they're also where you can cure fundamental problems, right?
Very good. Yeah, you can either hurt or heal.
So, yeah, but I think that engagement with healing energies, particularly for me, it was Reiki that did it. In the Usui tradition, the lineage is important, that I really started getting a connection in a far more positive way with forces that I'd kind of sensed up to now, but not really been able to engage with. And I think that was part of an extended healing process that I then went through. And as I discarded a lot of baggage, I felt myself closing in on a particular path. Okay, it's like the obstacles to seeing the way forward were slowly discarded. And around, I don't know, late 1990s, I started on the path of writing about these subjects. And over the next like 10 years, developed a literary style sufficient to convey the subject matter without it being overly technical or overly academic,
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually. I'm actually delighted to hear that.
Mm.
As I've mentioned it, I think a few times on this podcast, but I started out in the Golden Dawn lineage, but the week before I took my first Golden Dawn initiation, I had my first Reiki attunement in the Usui tradition.
Right.
Mikao Usui being
Yeah.
the founder of this tradition. For those that are unfamiliar with the art, it's Japanese rather than like something like Chinese meridian theory, but they're very, very closely intertwined when you get into the nuts and bolts of it. And it actually, I had what I thought was perhaps a typical revelatory experience of the initiatic trajectory of the Golden Dawn. Now, being a temple chief and a teacher in that system, I'm finding that it was not actually very typical to have that specific revelatory, as kind of as you're pointing out, the experiential component of dealing with higher order entities, or I would
Mm.
say subtle entities,
Yeah.
and I'm realizing that a lot of that probably happened because of the energy work and the initiation into that tradition. And then from
Mm.
there, learning about Chinese meridian theory. But the Golden Dawn and things like it, modern, Western esoteric orders, they have their own system of energy work. It's just if you don't know how to engage the
Mm.
energy body and work with it, intelligently, right? Because
Yeah.
there's that link that needs to happen. I kind of liken it to an alchemical marriage, where the
Mm.
conscious mind has to sync up with the energy body so that it can intentionally move it. It's kind of like learning to move, an arm that has atrophied. And I think that was a big part of it, for me. But I find now that in magical circles in Western esotericism and practical esotericism, the energetic component gets sort of poo-pooed, which I think is ridiculous, because to your point, it's kind of the other side of the coin. You need both of them.
Yeah. I think an element of style and lifestyle has entered, which is pretty pernicious actually. But that I'm not going to go down that road. Um, for me, I think I had two revelatory experiences in connection with Reiki. And I can boil them down into one actually, and it's bizarre because we're doing this like high energy meditation, and then all of a sudden I found myself in a space with a checker floor, black and white, and as I looked down to my right, I could see a coffin in which I was lying. Okay, and in front of me was a lectern. And I kind of turned the other way and I went into this tunnel and it all of a sudden went vertical. And I entered this pool of intense white light within which there was absolutely distinct sense of presences and the most overwhelming feeling of love and acceptance.
Mm.
And I kind of dwelt in that space for quite a time and then kind of fell back into the body. So I had this experience twice actually. Once just going into that pool of light, and once, as I say, in this Masonic setting. And it's interesting because my partner, who had the same meditation and on other occasions saw the same vision,
Mm.
and she asked me later, this booming voice, it's like a red carpet rolled down from the lectern towards her, and it was like a booming voice saying, "A well-hung tongue," and she was saying, "What does this mean?" But it was years later I picked up a book by Andrew Sinclair, the novelist, and descendant of the Sinclairs of Rosslyn. And in that book, the Sword and the Grail, I think it is, there's a short passage of 17th century Masonic lodge question and answer. And
Mhm.
in there it was staring me, in the face, a well-hung tongue. What is the key of the lodge? A well-hung tongue.
Did you have that available imagery before were you a Mason before the Reiki
I
experience?
mean, no, no, I never joined Masonry.
That's
I mean,
incredible.
I'd looked at books of Masonry,
That's
So this is
incredible.
this is what I'm saying about as we really open into an esoteric reality
Hmm.
rather than like the metaphysics or the archaeology or the historiography of it. When
Right.
we actually open into an esoteric reality, it has these symmetries within it.
Hmm.
And I've had a number of occasions now. One was 30 odd years ago. And we had this healing practice here, and this guy visited us, very talented astrologer, and he's speaking Turkish, not English, but he was like saying to me, Knights Templar, again and again, you know, and that was curious.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He made he said you have a scar on behind your right knee from a childhood, which is no way he could know it. You just and then at the other week we had a reading from a Vedic astrologer. And again, she said immediately she looked at my chart, Knights Templar. I thought this is weird because this is not where I live. This is not like mainstream stuff. This is really fringe.
Yeah.
And to have two astrologers with no connection whatsoever to these traditions bring it up and like just okay. So I begin to see all kinds of symmetries in the shadow world
Mm. Yeah.
behind the persona or beyond the persona that is connected to, but is not necessarily aware of.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. I remember actually the last time you and I spoke, you said something that has really stuck with me. And I wanted to just kind of bring that up. We were talking about how healing, particularly energy healing, but other forms of healing kind of play into the lifestyle, as you're saying, that is the embodiment of the esoteric disciplines and teachings. And you said that you thought that one of the best ways, if not the best way, one could know themselves to be in alignment with sort of higher order beings is to be in service to others.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the only way.
Yeah.
There isn't another path, to be honest. One of the things that like quarter century of energy work has taught me is there is an awful lot of parasitic entities around, and they are like on a scale of intensity and power. So that we have like low grade stuff, which after the energy healing session, you need to clear the room. You really need to do energy cleaning as well. You need to dispel this stuff. Some of the stuff needs to be sent back to where it came from.
Mhm.
Other stuff like revenants of people need to be guided to move on.
Mhm.
And this whole thing about ghost hunting needs to turn into a more service orientation to
Right.
people who are lost between the dimensions. Okay,
Yeah.
it's not a blood sport like chasing this stuff.
Right.
Okay, this
Yeah.
this is a form of personhood that people are dealing with, and yet it doesn't often have the respect that it deserves. You've turned into a red rose. Okay.
Miraculous. Well,
Yeah. Wow.
and it's what's interesting about that too, right? Given the red rose thing, is that Rosicrucianism can be seen, right? It's one of the central, I
Yeah.
guess, more modern organizations or orders or let's say historical movements within
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
overarching Western esoteric traditions. A lot of people understand now that the Inner Order of the Golden Dawn is
Yeah.
Rosicrucian. There are Rosicrucian Masonic bodies. There are Rosicrucian Martinist bodies.
Mm.
Um, and so when you read the Rosicrucian manifestos, I mean, I think the first or second axiom of the Rosicrucian axiomata is to admit nothing other than that I heal the sick,
Yeah.
and that gratis. So
Yes.
so there's other
Yeah.
dimensions of esoteric work aside from the physical healing too. There's a spiritual healing that I think is
Absolutely,
part and parcel.
absolutely. The only kind of cap that we encountered in this area, Ike, is some of the entities that possess people or are locked into their aura are of a power and danger that, you cannot deal with it. Um, we had a number of cases where I had to like refer them on to the most powerful spiritually engaged people I knew within the healing community here. And, they were frankly threatened by these entities. So, and this brings me again to look at this domain of the shadow side, that the contracts and commitments that you make in a lifetime continue well beyond it. So that, when they kind of manifest themselves in these unfortunate ways subsequently, most people's persona is so limited to their current path through life, they can't begin to connect or understand why these things are happening to them.
Mm.
There's like a profound metaphysical disconnect because of the lack of appreciation of the continuity of that subtle part of our being from life to life.
Mm.
And what we're incurring in this life will have all kinds of echoes and resonances post-mortem and in subsequent lives. And I think this is an important thing to put onto the onto the table.
Mm-hmm.
The scale of the game esoterically is far more dynamic, far
Yeah.
more protracted
Yeah.
than most of us even begin to guess.
Yeah. And I think, just maybe to kind of offer a final thought in terms of the energy component and that
Mm,
healing is that when you begin engaging and that I mean, I hate using the term subtle level because it smacks of sort of Blavatsky and theosophy to me, but when you begin engaging with that more maybe let's say spiritual side of these things, right?
mm,
The pneumatic nature of this or let's say etheric nature, again
yeah.
kind of theosophical, but the nature of
Mm,
these beings and that the way that as you kind of put it before, we're kind of interpenetrating everything is everywhere. I think that it's so important because what happens is it allows you to distinguish a little bit more accurately, or let's say, dare I say, empirically, or at least in being able to observe, and whether that's palpation or whether that's visualization of the like actually visually seeing this sort of etheric energy and its movement, it allows you to know a little bit better, I think, when you are kidding yourself, when you are fooling yourself, when you're kind of you're doing these things and deluding yourself into the belief that there is no consequence that is necessarily dangerous. I hear a lot of that now, where magic and things like that, and evocation. Largely, I hear people say the dangers are exaggerated, and it makes me think to myself, well, do you believe in any of this stuff, or are you cherry picking where and what you believe? But for
mm,
me, I found the energetic component to be I could not do without it, to be honest
yeah.
with you, in this stuff. I would feel like I was driving blind, you know. Um,
Yeah, you got no fuel in the tank if you don't have high energy in a ritual context. I mean, we find this like when we're doing family constellation therapy. Effective therapeutic groups are highly energized.
mm,
And when, so for instance, when you start a constellation, you place some people who represent various family members in the middle of a space, right? They're complete strangers, but the people who want the therapy do not engage with this. They simply select the people and place them.
mm,
And that symbolic formation is powerful enough to generate forces that collapse time essentially, because the representatives in the constellation will feel emotions and even physical posture and modes of gesture and talking, which are an overlay on their persona.
Mhm.
Okay. They're completely themselves, but they now have access to people who may well be long dead and gone.
Mhm.
Okay. And it's that collapsing that ritual space enables that provides gateway. And in this context, of course, it allows the facilitator to then move in on issues that may have been dormant for 200-300 years and resolve them. Okay, because
Wow.
at the end of the day, I think we touched on this when we talked. The universe is a teleological machine, and it's driven by justice.
Wow.
And I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And when we're like close up, like we are in these days, it's sometimes hard to see that. But nevertheless, working esoterically, you see that that is the way things are. And when you harmonize that field by healing the emotional ruptures that exist within it, the field energy changes immediately, becomes concordant.
Wow.
And then the presenting issues that the people who asked or requested the constellation brought to the
Mm.
session
Mm.
drop away.
Mm.
Okay, so we're talking about pure field effects here. Now, this stuff can only be accessed mentally, metaphysically through field concepts, energy field concepts. And again, it's the commitment to the healing intention that makes it work because we're always interacting with higher order beings.
Mm.
It's integral to the healing path and to every healing
Mm.
initiative that you take. They are always present because it's concordant with their nature, commensurate, you
Wow.
know.
That is probably one of the most beautiful and accurate ways I've ever heard that described. And there's so, and there's the poet in you, but but truly, and I say it fairly often, you need a degree of that kind of artistic, poetic understanding in order to be able to articulate and understand a lot of these things because they do some of the most practiced and I think important uh, teachers and writers in the fields of esotericism today describe they have to use the term field.
Mm,
Yourself, David Chaim Smith, very very experienced, practiced, developed esotericists will use this sort of field analogy or this terminology to describe these things. I think it's a very, very accurate, the most accurate we can get with languaging to
mm,
describe a lot of this stuff.
mm.
But I wanted to talk a little bit about where you are at now geographically. You're living in Istanbul, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
So what brought you there? Was it the researches on the Hagia Sophia, or was that sort of a later development for you?
No, it was like 30 years ago. I came here for work and time passed. 30 years passed by.
Wow.
I'm still here. I love it. So it's a real juncture, between the worlds,
Hmm.
uh, and such an overlap of cultures, traditions. I mean, it's just, the the countryside itself is just an endless, rich field of archaeological and cultural study. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I can
And the
imagine.
food's pretty good as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, right. So formerly being Constantinople, it's kind of always been that sort of meeting place, particularly in terms of
Yeah,
um, religious belief and stuff like that. I'm curious, and I think we spoke about it the last time we had a conversation, but for the listeners, many of us not thinking of in the West, we prioritize for whatever reason
yeah.
Greece and Egypt and
Mm.
maybe Florence,
Yeah.
or Rome as these sort of esoteric destinations,
Mm.
not realizing that Anatolia really was a major, major religious center uh, for a long time, and also the seat of Roman power at one point, with
Yeah,
Constantinople
indeed.
representing
Absolutely.
Byzantium, the Eastern Rome. Uh, what is the esoteric sort of atmosphere for somebody like yourself?
Oh, it's vast. I mean, for instance, hands-on energy healing is a native tradition throughout Central Asia.
Really?
Yeah, El Vermek, it's called, to give the hand. And it runs in certain families, certain Sufi lineages. Um, when we say lineages, we're talking about you can discern in the energy field of a person that they have these gifts. So, like from Constantinople to Japan, Central Asia is the home of this time of type of hand energy healing. So there's one dimension of this. So it doesn't raise any eyebrows here. People are familiar with the concept.
Excellent.
Oh yeah, my grandfather, he was always, this kind of thing, So yeah, that's one aspect. The other aspect is, of course, the Mevlevi, the Sufi orders are here,
Mm,
very powerful, powerfully represented.
mhm,
Um, then we have a scattering of Western style esotericists, okay, but the real roots of this country's esoteric tradition is the Neoplatonism that was like emanating out of Alexandria and Athens in the fourth and fifth centuries, or from Syria, with Iamblichus in the third century.
mhm,
That tradition, was swept up and kept alive by generation after generation of Hellenistic scholars at the Byzantine court.
mhm,
Michael Pacellus and people like this, all the way to George Gemistos.
yeah.
And from Gemistos, it was transferred to the Italian city-states. The metaphysics and the practice of theurgy was transferred, and it was picked up by Marsilio Ficino, of course, and the Florence school, the Florence Neoplatonic circle, I'd prefer to call them, because they were not just academics. They were not just busy with translation. They were busy with turning this thing into a practical mode. I think what Ficino wanted to do was to fuse Neoplatonic theory and practice with Christianity and generate a cultural revolution in the West.
Mm,
Unfortunately, that didn't happen because before it could take root, you had the Counter Reformation, which was a kind of disgust at the church's materialism.
mm,
And it was essentially, the church then was essentially a vehicle for the Italian elite families, and they generated vast profits. So you had the Reformation, and then of course church started the Counter Reformation. So you have a period like from the late 15th century to the 16th century when Europe was in religious conflict.
mhm, mhm.
And then you have the Rosicrucian manifestos.
Exactly.
And
An
all of
attempt
a
to resolve.
sudden, it all started to flow back in.
Yeah.
Okay. But the gateway for all this stuff was through Constantinople and this body of Hellenistic scholars who kept the tradition alive and continue to articulate it despite the church's crackdown on them.
Yeah. And it's interesting to talk about. We mentioned within sort of a spiritual or esoteric healing uh, concept, this idea of lineage. But now
Yeah.
some of the stuff that you've spoken about regarding the construction, or at least the architectural design of the Hagia Sophia, explicitly sort of delineates this Platonic or really Neoplatonic lineage, right? You
Yeah.
talk about Ammonius Hermias, the student of Proclus, and
Yeah.
then his student was Eutychius,
Yep.
And so he wasn't the architect though, right?
No, in fact, these guys were not architects. They were designers. Their normal work was scientific research,
Oh
advanced
wow.
scientific research. And one of them was a leading expert in reflective surfaces, that's to say light, sound,
Mhm.
and did substantial amount of theoretical work on that. The other guy was a leading expert in three-dimensional geometry. And
Mm.
and specifically its application to like domes, arches, supporting structures. So these two were like pure, research scientists, and they were given the job by Justinian, who had decided he needed the biggest church in Christian building in real fast time. So he gathered these two in and said, "Look, this is the area. This is where it's going to be. Get on with it."
Mhm.
And so that was the problem they were faced with. What were they going to do? So it's logical in a way that they would turn and look back to the tradition that had educated them
Right.
for their inspiration.
That's their quarry. Yeah.
That's to say the geometry of the Timaeus, the unfolding of the universe in different shapes,
Mhm.
and reflective surfaces to capture a certain quality, purely spiritual quality of light and sound,
Mhm.
which again is straight out of Timaeus and the Phaedrus. Plato talks about the chora,
Mhm.
which is like a golden matrix out of which everything emerges. So what they did is they created these domes with gold tiling, gold mosaic tiling, okay, and they put like vents to reflect the light from outside up onto these domes with silver tiling. And you can see it today. These areas of the domes high up reflect bright blue daytime with the color of the sky. So, and what this lighting arrangement did is bounce off the gold dome and infuse the entire nave with a golden glow.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
And then because of the lack of any uh, built-in Christian imagery, it's all pure marble. You have this massive reflection of sound and light,
Mm.
like 13-second sustain on any sound.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
like in a concert space you have maximum about 3 seconds sustain on any sound. Well, this was designed for it. So the choirs that fill the domes and semi-domes, their sound would like cascade down in waterfalls and reflect off the walls and floors and back up. And they created essentially a complete space for spiritual immersion.
Mm.
And there's a beautiful reproduction of the quality of sound on YouTube. Anyone can look at the Stanford Choir. They were allowed to pop a balloon in the middle of Hagia Sophia, and they recorded the echo. And then they used that as a sound filter for when the Byzantine choir sang. And they allowed the singing to go through this sound filter and recreate the sound that you would have heard in the 5th century.
Mm.
It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Anyone can check that out on YouTube. So
Yeah.
yeah, and beneath that level, they kind of embedded all of this kind of very esoteric lore, which is essentially a representation of the Hellenistic afterlife as the decorative design. And the book that I wrote is the first time that anyone has decoded this. It's never been spoken about before. Uh,
Incredible.
so yeah, there we go. It is a monument to the Neoplatonic worldview.
Unbelievable. And the idea too, well, obviously Neoplatonism, particularly being contemporaneous with a kind of Neo-Pythagoreanism, right?
Yeah,
In the two kind of interpenetrating each other. You've got things like
yeah,
Nicomachus's manual of harmonics and things like that. It makes me really think of, we're talking about choirs, and
yeah,
for people, nowadays you might not necessarily understand, you know, what choirs sort of the juxtaposition of melody and harmony,
Yeah.
and how that would all those sort of competing but complementary
Yeah.
melodies sort of backing each other, what that would sound like as a waterfall.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to me, and the idea that and this might be a little bit more of a modern idea, but the idea that architecture itself is frozen music, and
Yeah.
everything being
Yeah.
reliant on this idea of harmony, which is
Yeah. Yeah.
mathematically ratio.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I think not appreciated is that for modern musicology, when it looks at Byzantine chant, they talk about these nonsense syllables, right? These are long strings of vowels which are sung, but there's no obvious melody for them. And therefore they're like kind of, well, what the heck do you do with that? Okay, well, what these are is what used to be called aphasia grammata, or the barbarous sounds of invocation. In other words, these long strings of vowels are meant, they provide a drone. Like in Indian music, it has this drone, which
Yes.
it conveys a certain energetic state to the human energy body. Okay, so the Byzantine chant has these long strings. You can hear them if you listen to the Icons of Sound recording on YouTube, which is the Stanford Choir singing through this. You can actually hear the vibration, the deep vibration in the background of the melody and the verbalization. Okay, so this was derived entirely from pagan temple chant. I mean,
Mm,
it's not like, I mean, whatever the Byzantines had was essentially looking backwards rather
right,
than forward, because we've like pasted Christianity all over it.
right.
We don't grasp that the rudiments of their architecture, their literature, the church chant, everything is essentially an adaptation of Neoplatonic concepts, ideas, and practices.
Yeah.
So you even have Damascus writing a book in the name of a unknown false saint, which became fundamental to the Christianity's early theology.
Mm.
But it's just an extract out of Proclus's Platonic theology. That's all it is. Mildly edited to like pass muster, not proclaiming its polytheism loudly, but rather subtly introduced. And that became like a core text in early Christianity. But it's just Damascus, a paraphrase of part
Yeah,
of Proclus.
I,
So,
I,
the Byzantine culture, although it has this incredible reputation as the Christian bastion, was actually in its essentials, in its foundations, a complete con continuation of the Neoplatonic worldview and knowledge, skills, and everything else.
yeah. It's amazing to me. First of all, I can't overstate really in my own estimation how important it is someone like yourself being at this intersection.
Mm.
One of the things that I think is known about you is that you sort of specialize in the visuality of these
Yeah,
structures and of ritual and of things like that. But you're all extremely well versed in the history of the philosophy and its transmission, and not just the philosophy itself. And it's just so incredible, especially I don't know if the this sort of visuality was maybe the impetus for its growth and expansion to the degree that you have obviously cultivated. It was a product of being where you are in the world, because you really the Byzantines in their art and things, they became extremely sophisticated. You go to
yeah,
Rome and like, yeah, there are architectural feats like the
yeah,
Pantheon
yeah.
and things like that,
The
but
engineering, yeah.
it's not as ornate. Perhaps when we would have seen them in full bloom with the statuary and the paint, everything painted,
Hmm.
might have been much more impressive. But the amount of I don't know, sacred geometry sort of increases over time in the construction of these spaces in Byzantium, but then also, right, in the Islamic sort of Perso-Arabic Islamic Empire, we have beautiful, intricate design that is, uh, I think spiritually significant. So
Yeah,
to have somebody like,
that also is the child of places like Hagia Sophia.
mhm,
I mean, when Sinan's the great engineer, the great military engineer of the conqueror, the Sultan, the Magnificent, when he saw the Hagia Sophia, he was so inspired. He started to design and build mosques, which took the ideas and like ran with them. This was like 1,000 years later, okay, 1453 onwards, 1,000 years later. And he took the idea of the cascading domes and semi-domes and he made it a defining feature of modern mosque architecture. It's where that sense of uplifting architectural presence comes from. So it's like the Hagia Sophia is the mother of Islamic architecture. And of course, Neoplatonism is also the mother of Islamic esotericism.
mm,
They're the same texts that, we read, Proclus, all the others, Iamblichus.
yeah.
So you have really a split between science and esotericism, and the science is all Aristotle and commentaries thereon. And the esoteric stuff is all based on Neoplatonism. So yeah, there's
Mm,
a huge fusion of culture. The sheer spiritual impulse of that Neoplatonic third to fifth century was so powerful.
mhm,
It gifted the world a entire language of spiritual aspiration.
mm. Yeah, and one of the things as sort of an aside that I'm continually fascinated with is the sort of spherical nature of a lot of the religious buildings, the domes and things like that,
Yeah,
which we
yeah,
have, they not only beautify, right? There's for speaking Neoplatonically, there's an idea, right? I think Proclus, Porphyry, one of the ways of that the Neoplatonic philosophers expressed the soul
yeah, yeah.
was in it having a spherical shape, which as it descended into materiality, it lost. It became
Yeah,
angular.
yeah.
And something that's even in the Americas, where I'm located.
Hmm.
There's a kind of a famous book called Black Elk Speaks. It's I believe he's part of the Lakota tribe. He's one of the last
Okay.
the last known sort of shaman to go on record and speak about these ancient practices right at the time when all of that stuff was becoming assimilated. And he
Hmm.
says that really the way that their people and their culture uh, remained powerful for so long was because all of their dwellings and religious buildings were circular. And he said
Mm.
when the importation of this,
Mm.
European
Yeah. Angular
angular
architecture.
rectangle, he said that when they adopted that as their architecture, it stripped them of their power. He actually says specifically it made their young men effeminate and weak.
Yeah, it's like feng shui on steroids, isn't
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's interesting because there likely wasn't much.
Mm.
I mean, I don't really know, but there likely wasn't much influence of Neoplatonism on, the indigenous tribes of America. I mean, who
Yeah.
knows?
Well, we're back to Prisca theologia, aren't we?
Right.
The never changing truth at the heart of things.
Yeah.
And part of that is architectural form, geometric form is a complete language unto itself.
Yeah.
And
Um,
it's capable of expressing all kinds of spiritual ideas and ideals concretely, I mean.
yeah, so you recently participated in the Hermopolis Symposium, which
All
myself
right.
and Dr. Mirvad Abdel Nasser put on. You
Yeah, yeah.
the digital track. I would have loved to have you in person, but I think we linked up a little
Yeah,
later
it
on.
was very late, wasn't it?
We were happy to have
Maybe
you.
another time.
Yeah, yeah. So, but
Mm,
your your presentation was entitled "Mystery Rites as Rites of Possession."
yeah,
And I want to talk a little bit about that. And in it, you posit the idea of direct experience of a deity in ritualistic and even initiatory experience. I mean, the title of it is pretty, it explains
yeah,
the main point you're getting at. But you quoted, I forget, Whitehead, maybe, you said you making this distinction between imagistic versus doctrinal modes of religiosity. Could you
yeah.
expand on that a little bit? I found that very interesting.
Yeah, it's the anthropologist. I think his name is Whitehead. And one of the problems we have, or which we have had for decades, is people talking about the mystery cults as though they were religions. You know, was, for instance, Mithraism a competitor to Christianity? And the problem is that without kind of conceptual disambiguation, you get on all kinds of false paths and highways, right? Basically, what Wyatt did, we need to distinguish between those forms of religiosity, which are like top-down, hierarchical, have a canon of text and a definitive interpretation at one end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum, those forms of religiosity which are immediate and experiential and embodied. And it's not that these are like completely separate categories. We can all imagine that, it's a spectrum of intensities, right? But the mystery cults are right on the imagistic end of this scale. And that means they're not doctrinal. The quality of experience that you have in the mystery initiation is sufficient. Nobody can gainsay it. Nobody can say anything about it. There's no dogma that you need to obey to have that experience, but there are practical guidelines that facilitate it in terms of purification, devotion, dedication, blah, blah, which are like yogic rather than doctrinal. There's not a body of beliefs that you need to possess. And this is absolutely essential. Without this, you can't get what a mystery cult is. It's a wholly imagistic form of spiritual practice. And really, I would assimilate it more to like yogic, advanced yogic practices, specifically the Vajrayana traditions, the higher yoga tantras, which are in every respect imagistic, but they're currently, so to speak, embodied within a very doctrinal religious organization. So that's not a contradiction. It's just that's how they've survived.
Right.
But their actual practice is totally imagistic. So whatever vision you have of the deity at the time is good enough. That's how it should be for you.
Mm.
So I think that's the essence of it. I don't know. Does that does that explain it?
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful, and that's a wonderful way to explain it. I think it's the first part, right, of this idea of what the mystery rites are meant to do.
Yeah,
But it's the method by which they're meant to do it, right there, imagistically
indeed.
and working on the nous, or the highest part of the psyche, the soul, and mind of the initiator practitioner.
Yeah,
And because visuality and symbolism transcend language, and they can contain a large amount of information in a single image.
yeah,
We don't if you understand symbolism, a sort of coherent symbol system, nothing, and even to interpret symbols extreme rigidity becomes doctrinal, right? Now
mm,
there's a doctrine behind the symbol.
yeah,
So there
yeah,
has to
indeed.
be a little bit of a loose intuitive approach to it, but
Mm.
to be able to do that, I think you're accessing deeper parts of the psyche, really. And how would you say that goes into, how would you say that one affects the other, this kind of right of possession?
Yeah. I mean, Proclus said it's commensurability. To the extent that you align yourself with a certain deity, um, and with that deity's teleological purpose, then you're automatically in alignment. but you still need to do an awful lot in terms of cleansing your energy body to be able to meet them, even on a fairly light touch. Okay. So with voodoo, for instance, possession cult is kind of central to the practice. Okay, it's like almost wholly imagistic. With the higher yoga tantras, you're talking about the highest orders of spiritual beings, but the principle's the same. Okay, and through the grace of somebody who bears the lineage and maintains the lifestyle commensurate with that deity, thousands of other people can feel the touch of it. That spontaneous enlightenment that is conveyed when you merge your awareness with that of a deity, which is enlightened awareness a la lettre, so to speak. Okay, your karmic path, your past, your energy body commitments, this will not allow you to maintain that state of ecstasy. But once you've tasted it, there's no doubting that there's a hierarchy of higher order beings, that there's a teleological process running in the universe, and that you can be a part of it if you're only prepared to set your like persona aside a little
Yes.
and get down to some serious service. And
Yeah.
God knows, looking around the world today, there's not like there's any shortage of need.
Mm. Yeah.
It's like coming out of our ears.
Hmm.
Problems are so manifest and so many. So,
Yeah.
whatever person feels drawn to serve, that's where they should be. And
Yeah.
that's sufficient. But I think also in service, you feel less of a demand for confirmation of the esoteric world and this hierarchy, because the service kind of you're replete
Mm.
when you're in a mode of service.
Yes. And you're like you are more like you're saying to put yourself in alignment to make yourself amenable to a certain force or deity or power is to come into contact with it. And really, to me, the absolute is right. Plerosai. It is
Yeah,
fullness in and of itself. It can't want
yeah.
for anything because it's constantly giving of its fullness. And that to me, when I am in
Mm.
a that healing state, where I'm I think one of the great things about actually what I learned from the Usui tradition is that a lot of people when they do energy healing, when you learn from like the internet and stuff like that, I'm sending you the light, I'm sending you healing. And more so in the Usui tradition was that he discovered through meditation, all I have to do is empty myself and
Yeah, yeah,
become the vehicle, let the light let the key flow through me instead
yeah,
of getting in the way of how and where
yeah,
and when it's directed. So there's
yeah. Letting go of this chasing the results.
exactly. And one of the things that really the relief to my persona that I never thought would happen
Mm.
when I started doing massage therapy, Reiki, physical therapy, it was such a relief to not be thinking about myself for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the first benefit. No, really. I mean, the persona, I think, is too small a vehicle to sustain meaning in life.
Agree.
And if you wholly rely on its drives, needs, whatever desires, you're going to get shortchanged every time. You're going to be constantly chasing further hits.
Yeah,
But as you say, when you actually surrender that to some higher purpose, it's just like it's effortless. You're just like in the flow.
that's it. That's
And
it.
that's it.
You're aligned with the teleological machine.
Yeah, essentially. So the mystery cults are like a refinement of this basic process where you achieve sufficient degree of like transparency, let's say, that you're able to meet with these entities and beings almost on their level.
Mm. Yes.
And just a small anecdote, which one day my partner and I were in the office doing the invoices, from the healing center, and because of the buildup of energies released by people over a period of time, we've been recommended this guy to cleanse and purify. And so we said, okay, let's go for it. We met him. He's kind of Islamic scholar, and he had this book, it's full of diagrams and drawings and calculations and loose notes. He said, okay, let's go for it. And then one day we were in the office doing the invoices, over around the table, and I saw it distinctly. It was like a white sheet, but it was like an overlay. I could see through it, and it crossed the room from right to left. And as it passed us, both our knees buckled. I if the table wasn't there, we were going to be on the floor.
Oh
And it
man.
kind of swept through the room and through the entire office.
Mhm.
So this guy was working a form of angelic magic, I understand. This was the phenomenology of it.
Mhm.
This is, poetically, I say I was brushed by the wings of an angel, so to speak.
Yeah, that's
But,
incredible.
so some people have this connectivity to higher order forces. They can
Mhm.
work in this way at this level, This is
Mhm.
high level working because, you know. Anyway, I,
Yeah,
I, I just leave that.
incredible. I love the anecdotal stuff, to be honest with
Yeah.
you. I'm glad that you shared that. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about, if you'd like, anything upcoming that you've got going on, or you want people to sort of watch your spaces for.
Okay, well, the immediate thing is I'm writing a review of Christophe Ponce's forthcoming work, the volume one of the Tarot of Marsilio, which is absolutely phenomenal work. It's going to be in 3 volumes. I've only read volume one, and I think that's going to change tarot scholarship. Um, we have previously cooperated on 2 esoteric tarots,
That's right.
and then my own The Game of Saturn. So essentially, this is the final nail in the coffin of Dumet's view that there was no esoteric content in the tarot before the 19th century. This should be the nail in the coffin of that view. So that's one thing that I'm going to get that on Paralibrum in the next week or so, hopefully, to coincide with the physical release of the book, which is beautiful, by the way. So there's any serious tarot scholars out there, you need to check this out. Um, I'm writing another review of a literary memoir, Wild Twins. But the main work is The Mysteries of Mithras, which I'm just doing final edits on. Um, and for me, the importance of this work is that most Mithraic scholars start from Rome and then move forward in time. But Mithraism didn't start in Rome. It had distinct precedents. And what I've done is work to recover them and show the continuity from Anatolia, from the Hellenistic Ecumen, the linguistic zone of the Hellenistic world, as the source and origin of the Roman cult of Mithras.
Wow.
Okay, that yeah. Also, I've got frescoes of the ritual processes of initiation in full color, and I'll be discussing the ritual process itself that was enacted. And again, most scholars say, "Oh, there's like 7 stages, therefore they went through 7 stages." Not like that.
Hmm.
These were privately funded Mithraea of between 10, 30 people. Okay. The top 3 grades were almost certainly administrative. Okay. And the entry grades. So most people would have become soldiers within the cult. That's the main grade. But there was a second phase that introduced very powerful initiatory process. And I've documented that through the iconography of the cult. So again, for the first time, we're going to see it as a functioning ritual apparatus for inducing states of non-dual awareness.
Fantastic. Oh man, I can't
So
wait to
that'll
get
be
my
with
hands on
Tion. That'll be with Tion next month.
that. Yeah.
And let's see, it could be their first major publication of 2025. Highly
Beautiful.
illustrated, beautiful color illustrations of the rituals, the dress, everything in there. So
Wonderful.
yeah, that's and then I'm studying Middle Egyptian
Mhm.
with Dr. Colleen Darnell. The Darnells are very distinguished Egyptologists, Yale Egyptologists. So I've been on this since like April, May. Yeah, it's going to be. And the next thing we're going to work on translation is the Tomb of Nefertari, which is QV66, one of the most beautiful tombs in the Valley of the Queen. So that's like my homework. That's what I'm doing in the background.
That's excellent. Well, I mean,
And
there
I'm,
will
I'm
certainly be a
planning as
boom.
well to pitch a book to Inner Traditions. It'll be on the origins of the mysteries as a human institution from about 8,000 BC
Mhm.
through, and to address the issues of how they've contributed to humanity's spiritual progress and ethical development. So
Wow.
that's the big project I'm going to work on 2025.
Beautiful. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
like I mean, what like I was saying, there is certainly a boon that will be delivered by yourself shortly. I'm glad that you mentioned your work with Christoph. I actually spoke to him recently for the podcast about
Yeah.
his first volume of the Tarot of Marsilio. So I'll be sure to check out your review of it as well. So everybody gets a canned question on the show, which you may or may
Okay.
not know. Um, We've covered a lot of ground as we typically
Yeah.
do on episodes of Arcanum. For those listening today that um, you know heard us talk about energetic healing, geometric languages, the mystery rites, visual religiosity. Could you recommend three books? They can be your own for listeners to go out and
Oh, that
purchase if
goes
they,
without saying.
yeah, for people who want a nice inroad into some of these things.
The mysteries is difficult because all the books that I could gather as research material were written by classical scholars or archaeologists.
Mhm.
And frankly, they're not interested in the experience
Yeah,
of the mysteries, which is the one thing that everyone wants to hear about, of course. It's the one thing they never write about.
right.
So if anyone really needs the inside track on the mysteries, my book Misty is probably the most accessible because we've got the full recently cleaned frescoes of the Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii. It shows the stages of initiation into the mysteries of Dionysus. So I definitely recommend that.
Great.
In terms of healing, it's so difficult because the field is vast. And nothing immediately comes to mind. But what I did do a long time ago now, actually, is to collect the most extreme cases of healing that we encountered in our quarter century. And I gathered them together in a small paperback. It's called The Power of the Healing Field. And that, it's a Kindle for a couple of dollars. But in there, concentrated are the most incredible healing stories that will forever change your frame on reality and consciousness.
Mm.
I just collected them and recorded them all there. They are outstanding. That shakes up your categories better than almost anything. And so in lieu of actually living 20 odd years with energy healing, that book is going to give you the fast track into it
Mm.
and just how bizarre reality is. So it covers all kinds of interventions with entities, beings. Um, the deceased are a powerful section of that. And then looking at peak experiences as well, which are integral part of the healing path. So that's two, and I feel very selfish now
No
because
need.
I've only recommended my own.
No, no need, no need.
But
I
I
mean,
would recommend Christoph's book for those who are really into where did the tarot come from? How did it evolve? What are its Neoplatonic roots? Christoph really expounds that material very well indeed. You know, uh, it's perfect. That book is going to be a classic.
yeah.
I can't wait for the next volumes. It deals with about 8 cards, 8 trump cards in the first volume. So it leaves you like, okay, tell us the rest. So it's only in volume 3 that we see Marsilio Ficino's system for utilizing the cards as a spiritual aid. But I tell you, it's going to be a classic.
Excellent.
Going to
Well,
be a tarot classic.
Peter Mark Adams, thank you so much for
It's
joining.
been a pleasure, I.
Wonderful conversation. Love your enthusiasm. It has floored me since our first conversation. Your passion for this stuff. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being out there and doing the work that you do. And thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your time with me today.
My pleasure, I. Anytime.